Our speaker for tonight is Wanda Boggs. Wanda is a 30-year veteran of Elmbrook Schools. She is grateful for opportunities to earn degrees related to elementary, special education, and English as a second language. She taught at Brookfield Elementary throughout her career. Over the last 5 years of her teaching experience, she began to notice patterns of behavior in her students that she found concerning. Many students struggled with optimism, anxiety, bullying issues, lack of confidence, immature response to failure, inability to persevere through difficulty, and struggles with empathy and compassion. She began to incorporate lessons, neuroscience concepts, and a specific instructional process. Students learned to navigate their emotions, social relationships, thoughts about self, and analyze their responses to both positive and negative events. She found through newsletters and parent conferences, many parents were eager to apply these ideas in their homes and in their communities. And we are fortunate to have her with us tonight to share some of her experiences and ideas. So please join me in welcoming Wanda Boggs.
Well, I have a few thank yous as well. Of course, I want to thank Robin for inviting me. Thank you for all the work that went into these meetings. Being a teacher, I know that these things just don't happen. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the tech support. Over the years of the 30 years of teaching, I've taught with a variety of students, some middle school students, taught 8th grade social studies one time, students with learning disabilities, emotional, students with emotional issues, just a wide variety. And they have taught me not just about themselves, but they've taught me about myself. And I've learned the most actually through the children. So I want to thank Elmbrook for hiring me way back when, and for the wonderful opportunity and some of the learning opportunities that I did receive through the district, which were extensive. I feel very privileged. I also want to thank God for the opportunity to stand in front of you today. And I feel like it is always an honor to share any kind of wisdom that I've gained, mostly from the mistakes that I've made. So I have 2 children, and they're now 26 and 28. I have to keep thinking about the ages, and I'll refer to them at different points because they're 2 very different individuals. But I think some of the things that they've gone through may hit home with you. I also tried, it was a struggle for me to prepare this out of all of the presentations that I prepared, because it was so convicting to me that I was such a perfectionist. And there were so many different areas that as I'm writing it, I'm like, and what about you? And what about you? So I don't know if any of you are like me, but it really helped me, and I'm hoping that it helps you. So there are some elementary references. There's some that might be more appropriate for middle school or high school. I also sat down and I said, when I go to a meeting like this, and as a teacher, when I would sit at a meeting and a speaker would come in, what was it that I really wanted from them? And what it was is I wanted something I could take and use. Give me something that I can use. So I've got just a little bit of research. I did actually spend quite a few hours looking at all different kinds of research from different, authors and different blogs, from different writers, different internet videos, and I just tried to get a wide variety of different ages to get kind of a well-rounded background. So with that being said, I'm going to start giving you a little background information about perfectionism. Then the majority of the time will be spent in giving you ideas of how, if your child is struggling with perfectionism, and or you are struggling, and or someone in your family is struggling, hopefully you'll be able to glean some kind of an idea to be able to use in your life. Okay. So experts define perfectionism as a combination of excessively high personal standards and overly critical self-evaluations. I think it's really important to separate perfectionism from a high achiever. There's nothing wrong with being a high achiever, for working hard, for having a diligent attitude. But when it crosses over into perfectionism and it becomes so self-critical, and that inner critic becomes so loud, in the absence of absolute perfection, that person then never experiences a satisfaction. And that's when it really goes over into the perfectionistic category. So are you a perfectionist? What's really interesting, I was reading an article about by Paul Fritz called Overcoming Perfectionism. He said the first thing they'll say is, I'm not a perfectionist. Absolutely not me. All right. He really, after studying perfectionists, came up with three really interesting conclusions. One, perfectionism interferes with success. Two, perfectionists often will be denied self-satisfaction. And three, they usually achieve less than those with realistic goals. So if you look at these three things, I will refer to them throughout the presentation, but a perfectionist often has a trouble experiencing success because the level that they expect of themselves is almost paralyzing. The self-satisfaction, even if they work their hardest, they spend hours and hours on something, they've done their due diligence, they've checked all of the boxes off, no matter what the product is, it's still not quite good enough. And they have this inner voice that says, not quite good enough, I'm never there. So the third area is that they achieve less than those with realistic goals, because there are several different things that happen. Could be procrastination. They so want a perfect product that they don't even want to get started because it's overwhelming the process to them. How am I going to make everything in this assignment, in this report, in this work situation? How am I going to make it perfect in order to meet my personal standards? So perfectionism really can look differently. And I think it really could even look differently within each child, but I think it also could look differently within the same child, depending on the day. So it often is about control, right? A perfectionist wants to control the situation. It makes them feel safe to know that if they work hard enough, everything will work out all right. Unfortunately, in life, that isn't what always happens. And so we need to teach them how to release some of that control and to find some satisfaction in something that is less than perfect. Could look like frustration, sometimes anger or irritability. It can also look like a failure to complete. So they start something, but they don't finish it. There may be 6, 8 different things started, but nothing is finished. If I finish it, then I have to say the end. I'm done. I have to be satisfied with my work. So there are some causes of perfectionism, but I don't want you to assume that every one of these is what's causing, your child's perfectionism. I think some kids are just wired for perfectionism. Some kids early in their life, a lot of research shows that they were valued for their achievements. And of that group, there were some that also, if they did not achieve, the parents were critical and or shaming. So that's one cause of perfectionism. A big cause is the second two, the fear of failure and mistakes and the fear of rejection. So it looks like irritation, it looks like procrastination, but they are actually afraid of failing. And failure to them doesn't look like the normal person. It looks like just being a little bit less than the best. They have all or nothing thinking, and their thought process is, I should, I ought, I must. They don't approach something with passion and like, this is going to be exciting. I'm going to tackle this project. I've got to be the best. I've got to get the best score. The scores have to be across the board. I must do this. I ought to do this. And they just build the self-pressure on themselves. Jory McKay is an author that I found. I really liked her article. It's called Overcoming Perfectionism, 5 Ways to Quiet Inner Perfection. And she separated in a very clear way, I think, the different types of perfectionism. So the perfectionist can be self-oriented. It's just this internal desire to be perfect. Some of us that are perfectionists, in order to have our self-worth, our self-esteem intact, it's based on performance. And our self-esteem, I say because I'm thinking of me, my self-esteem stays intact as long as I'm successful in everything that I try. Social perfectionism is the desire to live up to the expectations of others. So in this case, the obvious and, look at this as parents, but it can also be teachers. It can be a coach. We've heard some of those coaches that speak to our student, our children, and they have an expectation. And sometimes our students idolize them and also want to live up to the expectations of those other people that influence their lives. Other oriented perfectionism is when the person holds others to unrealistic expectations. And this is the one I'll talk about last, because this interferes with relationships. We have such high expectations for ourselves that we also hold others to those. And when they don't meet those expectations, the relationships are very difficult. So this scale, the perfectionist scale, it looks like, a very good, excellent performance, and the perfectionist is over here. It always have to do more than what's expected and to have a better result as well. So I'm going to start going through a series of different ideas that might help you reframe perfectionism. So this is the same tree in this picture, but on the left, the perfectionist looks at the product and sees something that is barren, something that is missing. It's not complete. It's not blossoming. It isn't finished. It's not final. It's not producing anything. But a person who has reframed their thought process can look at the same product and see something that's in bloom, something that is progressing, a skill that is moving along a scale. And they can feel the satisfaction of that, whereas a perfectionist does not experience that satisfaction. So one of the strategies that you can do is to help students of all different ages and adults as well rewrite the story. So what I mean by this is we have a story that we produce in our heads, and sometimes it's accurate and a lot of times it's just not. So in this case, the last 2 years of my teaching, the school district of Elmbrook, they started having an award. It was called the Golden Apple Award. And you would be nominated for it. There'd be a couple of teachers from each building. And it's a wonderful award. I mean, there's some teachers that have worked, extremely hard. They've had some really cool, innovative things that they've done. And I went to the ceremony. I was nominated the first year, I think, that they had it. And I went and I waited for my name to be called, and kind of waited, and I'm like, well, there's one more. Just save me for last, right? And there was no name. And I went home that night, and to be honest with you, it was really a struggle. I'm at my 29th year, and I thought, wow, I've worked 29 years, night and day and weekends. And I thought I did like everything that I could possibly humanly could. And I didn't get the golden apple. So I kind of forgot about it, let it go, but it bothered me more than it should have. So the next year, come back and I get nominated again. This is my last year of teaching. Well, surely when they're getting the old woman out the door, I'm going to get the apple, right? So I go to the ceremony and same thing. I wait and I wait and I wait. And I'm like, no name called. And I thought, wow. And to be honest, I acted kind of like a child. I didn't say anything, but I was quiet on the way home. And my husband's like, you're okay. It's like, you're a good teacher. You didn't need that apple to tell you that. But for some way I had shifted what was important, which was my success of my kids, to the apple. And I had it all wrong. It didn't matter whether I had the apple or not. What mattered is whether those kids had an experience in their lives that was growth oriented, that helped them think about their problems, that helped them persevere. The dance parties that we had in class together, right? When we just bonded. So sometimes things in life just reframe things for you. And so this was the incident that reframed this. And this was the truth. So sometimes the lie was that I needed that apple to tell me I was a good teacher. That was the lie that I believed. But the truth was this: on the last day of school at Brookfield Elementary, all the teachers stand outside and the buses go by, and it's a very joyous event. The kids are screaming, all the windows are down, the bus drivers are honking the horns, all the teachers are waving goodbye on the last day. It's really a fun event. So all the buses go by, and I'm standing kind of towards the end, and the last bus kind of limps along, and I see one of my students, James, and he's got his hands up against the window like this in his face, and he's streaming with tears, and he's mouthing, "Bye, love you." And at that moment, that apple meant nothing, but the connection that I had with him, that he was going to miss me, that I was going to miss him, I reframed my whole need for that external reward. So these are the kinds of stories and the things that we can tell our children to help them understand what really is important. So this is just a simple, chart, and often the story that is in their head is far from the truth. And with teenagers, I wouldn't hesitate to use this. They'll roll their eyes. They'll tell you it's stupid, right? Maybe they'll go in their room and slam their door. I don't know, but when you tell them what the truth is, they will remember that, and they may need that sometime. They may need to just stand up to someone else who's asking them to compromise something, or they may need that to stand on that at some point. So even though they act like they're not listening, and I know this now because my son is 26, and he now makes these comments. Do you remember when you told me about this? Do you remember when you told me not to give up? Do you remember when I was doing this and I didn't even want to talk to you? I was listening. You are the biggest influence in their lives besides their teachers, and they are listening. So social media is so difficult, and I can't even imagine, what they're exposed to. And, I have a little involvement with Facebook, but another way is that social media, it gives the appearance of perfection, and the students feel the need to keep up. And when you look at this photo, what is it that you see? Like, how would you describe this ceremony? Is there anybody? Graduation, yeah. What words would you use to describe it? Achievement, success, right? Happy. All right. So what's interesting is that this is the story, right, that is in a lot of our kids' heads as they look at social media. Wow, that student's highly successful. They're very intelligent. School came easy. 4-year graduation with honors. They must be naturally gifted. They're confident and successful. They never struggled. Look at them. Look at the happy family. But the truth is this. Okay. The student was at best average in high school, struggled every year of his school career, experienced jokes and texts that were being sent about kids going to tech schools. Took him 6 years to graduate. He repeated one semester in college after he missed the passing grade by 1%, which put him back an entire year because of the program he was in. He transferred schools because he was told, you don't have what it takes to be a nurse. And the truth is that he was not confident and successful ever. He was anxious and insecure. And before every exam, he was shaking and sweating, and his parents were praying. And that's how it went. And that's my son. This is his sister, Christy, and my husband, Keaton. And this is at the WCTC graduation. And he's now working at Mendota Mental Health. And he's passing on his struggles to those people and giving them hope where there is no hope in that institution. All the people at Mendota have mental health issues and have committed some kind of crime, usually related to their mental health. And so without those struggles, he would not be the nurse that he is. We need our kids to struggle. We need to let them fail. Yep. We need to let them fall flat on their face. It's so important.
But then it goes back to our perfectionism, because we don't want that to happen.
Exactly. Okay, I remember this building reminds me. So as I'm up here, this is like my post thought after looking back. It's not who I was in the process. Mm-hmm. This is what I learned. So for example, somebody might remember Mike Brock. He was my son's 5th grade teacher. And I worked in the school at Brookfield Elementary, and the perfectionist that I was, I went over to my son's locker to help organize it on a regular basis. And to help, I sent him emails in case he would like some of my suggestions and just to know a little bit more about my son. I was that parent. And he came out in the hallway one day and he said, "You need to stay away from the room." and I did. And the locker became to the point where it was overflowing. And then all of a sudden one day things came home. And over time, the grades in the first quarter were a mess. And after that, when I let go and when I kind of stepped back is when he started to be able to figure things out. So I was that parent. A second thing that I think has been really helpful, and I use this analogy with my class, and I've also used it with friends, with family, with myself. So there's two different things you can think about. Failure can define you or it can refine you. So if you think about jewelry, if you have like jewelry that we'd get at Kohl's or whatever, it's probably only like 37% pure gold. And real gold, after it's refined, is about 99%. And pure gold goes through this process of becoming, kind of rough around the edges, not pure, not perfected into this pure form. But it takes a chemical washing, and then it takes a second chemical washing to remove the silver. The gold is heated up to 1400 degrees. And there's another chemical bath. It becomes a heated liquid. And I'm probably skipping about 6 steps, but in the final product, it's refined gold, and it's actually like in a powdery dust type of form. So we need our kids to understand that it's really their choice. Are you going to let failure define who you are, or are you going to let it refine you? And are you going to look at every time that you fail and look at what went well? There are things in there that went well. And what are the pieces that did not go well? What are the missing pieces? And I'll go through a few ideas with that in a minute. So failure makes clear what thoughts and actions contributed to success. All right, students need to understand that success is a process, not an event. All right, now this is another reframe strategy, and it involves using literature. This looks like it would only be good for kids, but it's kind of transformed our household, to be honest with you. Although, some members of our household are childish, but not me. This is a great picture book by Peter Reynolds. It's called Ish. And the character in the book draws, and Ramon loves to draw. But one day his brother comes along and he looks at what he's drawn and he's that's a mess. Those are ugly. So Ramon takes and he throws everything on the floor and he crumples it up into little balls and he starts to hate art. After that, his sister, after a couple of days of doing this, of drawing and then throwing and drawing and throwing, he notices that his sister's picking these up, and she takes them to her room and she pastes them up on the wall, and he runs in after her and he said, what are you doing with my pictures? And she looks at him and she said, well, look, this isn't a vase, but it's vase-ish. This isn't a house, it's house-ish. Indicating that it is a process. Anytime we start something new, there's a learning curve. So I started using this, and in the end, he does take up drawing again when he releases himself from the perfection that he doesn't have yet. So it really speaks to that perfectionism. And I started using it in my classroom. So the kids would be struggling, let's say with fractions or something. There'd be someone, even my top students, when they would come to a challenging problem, they'd be frustrated. So I'd write problem solving-ish, and on a note card or a Post-it note, put it on their desk, fraction-ish. When I would lose my glasses and I would need a kid to find them in the room, it's like glasses-ish. So it became the language of the classroom. So it allowed everybody in the classroom to not have to reach that level of perfection every single moment. In our family, we started using this as well. And when my husband tries to fix something with the duct tape and a wide variety of other interesting things, it's always ish. So we now use it at home as well. I'm going to go through this. I just kind of went through this, but if anybody wants a slideshow to use or to think about something that you could do at home with your kids, those are just some slides for that. So reframing perfectionism using literature. This is a picture book, but it really is appropriate for middle school and high school and really beyond. It's a very clever book. It's by Steph Wade. And he talks about the leaf who is at the top of his class. And this leaf has gotten, Lance Cottonwood is the leaf's name, has gotten an A in wind resistance, an A in photosynthesis, and an A in pigment changing. It's absolutely adorable. But he's got the final exam coming up. And how am I going to be perfect in that too now? How am I going to keep that up? So he's on the branch and he starts to say to all the other leaves, so you go first. And he starts making excuses, right? And you probably hear some of these excuses maybe from your students at home. And it's based on fear. Can I keep up this level of performance? And what's going to happen if I don't? So in the end, all of the other leaves end up below. He's the last one left. And what he realizes that in his vulnerability, he finally says, you know, I'm worried. And he tells them that below it, he's seen kids trample on the leaves. What if he's the trampled one? All right. And so the fears are revealed. So in the end, the other leaves on the ground start to encourage him. And because he was vulnerable and they saw him as vulnerable, they started to cheer him on and say, hey, you know, no one's perfect. He finally jumps and then is successful. So it's just a great story for reframing perfectionism. Okay. And this one, this is another strategy, and it's using feedback to encourage progress over perfection. This is a little bit from Carol Dweck and some of the language of mindset as well. But sometimes our language and the way we give feedback to our kids, we don't really realize that the words that we're giving them are actually enabling them to be perfectionists, encouraging them to be perfectionists. Hey, you're a top-notch student. You're gifted and talented. You know, you're an A student. If you just worked hard enough, you would be successful in everything. Do we really believe that's true? Could you work hard enough on anything that you tackle and have success with it? The computer, engineering. It's really not a fair thing to tell people. Everyone in this family is great at math. If you don't get into blank college, your life is a failure. So what they hear is that you are valued based on your performance. That's how we value you. Whatever your performance is, if you fall into this category, you have value. Now, in the progress feedback, you might say, always look at the effort. Your effort's reasonable, and you've spent an appropriate amount of time on that project. All right, you're a kind person who realizes that failure is part of the learning process. You reward the acceptance of not having that perfection. Then if there is something, you actually, can sit down and take a look at it. Let's look at what you want to improve. Let's break it down and look for ways to progress. Let's say it's physics. What's the most challenging aspect of physics? What's your relative strength? Always show them there's something in there that they are good at. And if you want to progress, what might you try? Study with a partner, seek help. As soon as you note the struggle, perfectionists will wait till they're drowning. They don't want to admit, or they're fearful of looking like they need help. And so they need to learn to get help early on in the game. Watching online videos. But in this, the message is your value is based on your effort, but it's also based on your willingness to try a new strategy. Your value is based on you recognizing the fact that you don't need to be perfect, that you are human, and that you have strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so what does this look like to you? I knew there was going to be, I said, if there's going to be any men in the audience, they were going to get this right away. Yeah. So a friend of mine came over and she looked at it and she goes, a marker? But you are exactly right. All right. So a perfectionist doesn't see the whole board. Okay. So let's take a look at, I borrow this from my son, and it's way heavier than I thought. Okay. So the bullseye is very small in comparison to the whole target. And so a perfectionist keeps trying to hit that center target. And when they don't, it becomes devastating to them if this is the pattern of their life over and over and over again. Oops. Oh, now I gotta go back this way. So they tend to look at things as binary. So it's either this or that. It's either the bullseye or nothing. It's either perfect or not acceptable, right or wrong, A grades or failure, all or nothing. So we can use this bullseye analogy to show them that, success is not determined on 100% or 0 scale. Anything that hits that board is scoring points. You have the double bullseye, but you have single bullseyes, 3-point scores, and so on. And I'm not even going to try to speak to the game of darts. I'll show you how to apply this analogy in a minute. Now, because I'm not a perfectionist, I forgot the darts. But let's say that these were darts, okay? And I am aiming for the board. Okay, and that was the result. Would there be any degree of success there?
You almost got the board. You almost hit the board.
Okay, so what they need to understand is even what looks like complete failure is actually an opportunity to learn. Because if I would continue to throw these again and again, already my mind could say, boop, boop, failure. Or it could say, wait a second, what do I need to adjust? Well, it could be the arc. It should be coming up and going down so that it hits the board. It could be the angle that I was throwing it at. It could be the speed or the force of which I threw it, or the position of my elbow. So what I'm trying to draw is an analogy between the dartboard and how you can approach their thinking. So failure can be looked at like failure, or it can be looked at as an opportunity to adjust. And if it were framed, think about if you're a kindergartner, your 4th grader, your 7th grader, your 9th grader, and your high schooler heard that message over and over again. Failure is an opportunity for you to adjust. Okay, so let's see what we need to adjust. Wouldn't that feel a lot different? So an example for an essay, let's say student gets back an essay. You could use that dartboard analogy. The bullseye in this one, let's just look down here. The bullseye in the center, you might have gotten exceeds in convention. You hit the bullseye, but you had a proficient in word choice, but you're still on the board. There's still success there because you're on the board. And if you had a developing, I know a perfectionist would say, I'm not even on the board yet. But then you can take and you can kind of categorize and show them the degrees of success that are actually happening there, because they just see all or nothing. Okay, now this one, ACT scores, SAT, I don't even know what they're all using right now to get into college. And I know it's very important. And so my point is not that it's not important, but this is what I've kind of noticed. First of all, this is the ACT scale. 35 plus is a 1% of test takers receive that score. The average score is about 21, and so on. You may have the bullseye, right? You may have the score of 35. And there's a student that I know that my principal told me about, and he had the score of 35. And he was top-notch swimmer. He went to college, had the same exact results, flew through college, was a valedictorian. And his dad went to meet him in the morning and to take him over to where the ceremony was going to be held. And he found him dead because he had committed suicide. Right? So success, high achievement without understanding how to respond to failure, and the fact that you can cut yourself some slack and you can learn throughout your whole life to do that, is much more important than that 35. It doesn't matter what the score is. What you need with it is strategies. You need to know how to respond to failure. You need to know that it's not you, that you're not a number. My kids would get back their MAP scores and they would cry. And I'd go over and I'd look at them and I'd take their little chin and I'd say, you are not a number to me. My mom's going to kill me. I said, you are not a number. I don't want you to even think that. And they would sweat bullets. It was devastating to watch. And it took me weeks to unravel everything that I had built up because of that one number, just like the golden apple. So the last part of the presentation, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about other-oriented perfectionism, holding others to unrealistic expectations. Now, I'm going to be honest, I did this in my marriage. And so over the past couple of years, I've actually, had the opportunity, my husband and I have been working through some of these things, because being a perfectionist, why wouldn't he be a perfectionist too? I don't get it. Right? Did you not see the laundry on the step? You walked right over. Are you having trouble with your eyes? Should we go to the eye doctor? Like, what is happening? But it was with everything, right? And so I needed to release myself from my perfectionism. And then I was able to release him from his perfectionism, or lack of perfectionism. Sorry, honey. Okay. So relationships are really tough for perfectionists. Sometimes our kids, our marriages, our friendships, the kids come home and talk about, right? We think, oh, both people of the relationship have strengths, and the relationship is perfect as each person is going to meet the other person's needs all the time, right? That's why when you go to church, you have this whole scenario and it's beautiful and everything's going to be great. And you see the relationship as a 50-50 agreement. Each person is able to put themselves in the other person's shoes and understand what they need, right? That's kind of what we think about relationships, but it's really not the truth. The truth is that we need to redefine for them, what's a loving friendship? What is a loving marriage? What's a loving relationship with your neighbor? What does that look like? And they're really watching us. And that's one thing I discovered with my daughter, is she was watching how we were reacting with one another. And being handicapped and cognitively disabled, she was just mimicking our responses. And it was kind of like, whoa, it's like when your child swears, for the first time, you're like, where did you hear that from? You're like, oh, and you have this realization. So in a loving relationship, we recognize that people have strengths and weaknesses. Both parties are willing to be vulnerable. I'm a perfectionist. He is not. Can we meet somewhere in the middle? What is it that we both really need for each other? So we both kind of came to the table and said, hey, I'm willing to be vulnerable with this. I know I need to work on this area. I need to let go. And then slowly over time, we work through this. The relationship is perfected through the lens of grace. So grace is the biggest gift that we could give somebody. And we first need to give grace to ourselves. We're not perfect. We look at the world. It is so far from perfect right now. And if we could give each other grace, then there's so many other things that would improve. So think about grace as something that you could give to someone, that whatever proportion you give, whatever proportion you say, you don't have to meet this standard. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. Think about it almost as like an unconditional love, not a free for all, but unconditional love. Forgiveness when that person falls, forgiveness when they have a breakdown. The grace that you are able to model, you will get that all back. And that's what we kind of discovered at our house. This one is also, I think, kind of important because perfectionists do see like a breakup as something tragic. I looked this up and it said that less than 1% of high school sweethearts stay together. Yet our kids just fall apart. My son had two good friends, and one, I think it's only been a year. I want to misspeak, but we'll just call him Sam. And he also committed suicide last August on the anniversary of the breakup date. Right? That's all he could see. He couldn't give himself grace, that I'm going to find someone else, that this is what happens to most people, in high school, that he wasn't the relationship. His identity wasn't based on whether that relationship stayed together or didn't in that case. And also they often have trouble with the degree of motion. It's just, I feel terrible. So you need to reframe it. And you can reframe it in your own speech. I feel terrible right now, but there's still hope. Perfectionists often will see a friend playing at school and they'll see it as a threat to their own relationship. Instead, you can turn it around and say, well, why do you think they have a lot of friends? What is it that they're saying and they're doing that create this? And then this one I think is really super important for all ages is, do you model this for them? I had a friend that I grew up with, and after my son died, she was amazing. She came to the house every day. Christy was still a little bitty preemie, and she came every single day and helped me. But after I got to the point where I could have some freedom, she wanted to go back to the same lifestyle of going out, playing pool, having a couple of beers, and I had to move on, and it felt crushing to me at that time. And I felt like I needed to seek her approval, but I had to keep that boundary where I knew it needed to be. So another thing is to tell kids of all ages, what are your personal boundaries? Have you had a discussion about that with them? And what would you do for a friend? So I think it's really important that they don't compromise those. Okay. Oh, we're actually not doing too bad. Okay. So in this slide, I'd like you to tell me like what you see. Is anybody get a shout out? Price for gas. Stop sign. Okay, is it a whole stop sign? All right. Do you like the price of gas? Not too bad, right? Okay. So there's a lot of background information on this slide. And in my life, when I first started out and my husband and I had children, we were going to have the smartest kids. I'm serious, we were. And they were going to be the most athletic children and the most successful children, surrounded by friends, and they weren't going to have any issues. I mean, why would they have issues, right? And so this is how I approached motherhood. And, when I ended up having the twins way back in 1993, 4 months early, and had a 1 pound, 6 ounce baby and a 1 ounce, 9 pound baby, all of a sudden, I already had to reframe what was going to be perfect. It started right there. And as they grew up, my son died at 8 weeks. Now I had to reframe what I'd imagined. Oh, do you have twins? Are those twins? I'd imagined everything, the perfect, right? And so following that, then we found out that my daughter was cognitively disabled. And I had to reframe my thinking once again. And I had to switch my level of perfectionism. And as she grew up in school, we moved out to Brookfield because I knew some of the teachers here were absolutely outstanding. Crystal Connick and Linda Elbersworth at that time, amazing teachers, speech and teachers for kids with cognitive and learning disabilities. So I brought her out to the school. And to be honest with you, I was terrified at first because now all my friends were going to know how low my daughter was. And it was really painful. It was really painful. And then my son, he came along and then he had ADHD. And I'm like, was I supposed to have the third child? Was that the perfect one? So we have to let kids know that they have to have this skill, and that even though what they see on Facebook, what they see around in the world isn't what's happening in that home, we have to keep reframing it for them with what the truth is. So, oh, let me give you the background on this one. So when my daughter turned 18, she had a surgery, and she came out of the surgery and she was completely psychotic. So not only did she have a cognitive disability, but she was completely psychotic, and they couldn't figure it out. They just kept throwing medicine after medicine after medicine, 14 hospitalizations, 8 years later, on 20 pills a day. And you can imagine, what had happened to my whole idea of the perfect life and the perfect children. And I was nearly crushed. But what helped me get through is that I learned how to reframe my expectations, and I learned to take triumph in the little things. By God's grace, she has been in a healing process, and we were able just in the last 3 years to get out 15 of the 20 pills. And so she is living at home. The last 4 years since I retired, I brought her home, and I felt like there was something inside of me that was saying, what you did with your students, now you do it with her. So it was time to lay everything aside. And I loved my job. I miss the kids dearly. I cried for the first year, on and off. I struggled with my identity. My identity was my job. People would say, what are you? I'm a teacher. And I wasn't anymore, but I was a mother. And I was a mother of a child that needed it the most. And so I had to reframe again. This was just last week. Now remember, right? I wanted the athlete, the top student, all of those things. But we were so thrilled. We had tears running down our eyes because we were driving, live in Waukesha. And my daughter said, hey, what's going on with that stop sign? There's only half of it there. And it was like someone had just cut it off in half. She'd been on 20 pills for 8 years. She never would have noticed a stop sign. And my husband and I looked at each other. We were just bawling in the car. You okay, Mom and Dad? Oh, fine, we're fine. Just happy cry. And then we could roll a little further down the road. And she looks and she says, look at that. The price of gas, $2.99. Again, we're like flabbergasted. It was the biggest victory in the world. But we could have chosen a bitter route. And for a while, I was kind of going there, to be honest with you. These are all my circumstances. Really, why me? And so I used to teach this to my students. You can choose bitter or you can choose better. But life is not going to be perfect ever. And they're going to experience these things. So if they hear these kinds of stories and they say, wow, that all happened to you, and you're still up there and you're still chugging along and you still find joy in the world every day. We walk along the street, we're singing songs, we're thanking him for the birds. I think I did that 30 years ago. I didn't even see them. So all of these trials, the failures, have really changed who I am. So that's just a slide that kind of finishes that. So I just want to end with this, and we can take some questions. I had a great opportunity to work with Liz Maligny. I always struggle with her name a little bit. I think she still is the GT coordinator. I don't know if that's true. Yeah, she's wonderful. And she invited me to work with some gifted and talented students in middle school. And so I just kind of, co-taught with her and did some presenting. And I was doing a presentation about handling anxiety, which is, something a lot of all of us are experiencing. So we went through the whole presentation. There was this young lady there, an 8th grader. And I noticed, like tears going down her face. And I went over and I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And she said, I said, are you having anxiety? Is this? And she says, well, no, not really. She said, but I only get anxious because I know that no matter what I do and how hard I work, it'll never be enough for my dad. And I didn't know how to respond. Like I didn't have a response, and she was dead serious. She was just dead serious. And I ended up writing this poem, and I'd like to end on this on her behalf. I was wondering one thing. Am I perfect enough yet? Am I all you hoped I would be? The trophies on the shelf are full from left to right. I toil on my studies and grow weary from the fight. Another high score, a ribbon and first prize. I present them and look for approval in your eyes. But each time I meet the goal that you have set, the bar is raised. And on this, I can bet. To keep the sparkle in your eyes, I must achieve more. So I pause now and ask once again, am I perfect enough yet? I wonder what you see when you look at me. Am I just a product of the bullseyes that I hit? Will you love me if there's something that I need to quit? Am I the college you hope I attend? Am I the score you announce to your friends? Am I perfect enough yet? I need to hear that I am your daughter. I can't hear you through the lies. I need to hear that my value was set the day that I was born. I need to hear your love is not based on condition. I need to hear that I don't need to fulfill a family tradition. Am I perfect enough yet? Will you swing me when I succeed in a circle round and round? More importantly, will you pick me up and hold me when I'm face to the ground? I don't need a coach. I don't need a cheerleader. I don't need you to brag about me. I need to know that your arms are open in both my successes and my defeats. I need to know that you'll forgive me when I fall short of victory. I need to know that you'll love me just the way I am. Remind me that I'll always be your little baby lamb. I need to know I'm beautiful with tears streaming down my face. I need to know you'll hold me when I'm a basket case. My life will be up and it will be down. And when from my head rolls my shiny crown, don't cut me off or cast me to the ground. Don't slam the door when I'm not enough. So I ask you one final time, am I perfect enough yet?